No, not on. Hello? I don't think the mic is working. Well, hello everyone. I was supposed to give you a 5-minute warning. Technical issues. Normal with these things, but we'll be starting up here in just a few minutes. But I just want to thank you all for coming. It's exciting to see a bunch of people, at least in person, for this kind of inaugural BGSU Science Cafe. So just hang tight for a couple minutes while we build this up.
Sure.
We'll have our official introduction.
Sure.
Layout of what today's going to look like, and then invite our first speaker, Dr. Ostrowski, to give the presentation. All right, so are we good? It's got to be a little louder. It's got to be a little, okay, yeah. Okay, is this good? There we go, that's better. And for once in my life, I actually have to raise this up. Usually it's the opposite way. There we go, okay. All right, well, thank you all for coming. This is really exciting. My name is Timothy Davis. I am the director of the Center for Great Lakes and Watershed Studies here at the university. And I'm really pleased to have you all here today for this kickoff event for BGSU's Science Cafe. Now, the idea behind these events are that we are conducting a lot of research on the Great Lakes and the surrounding watersheds, and we really wanted to make the research that we're conducting at the university accessible to residents of Bowling Green and throughout the Northwest Ohio region. So we really wanted to connect on kind of a more person-to-person level the science that we're conducting here at the university. Obviously, trying to start up something that is intended to be in a small, intimate location, typically in a local business like, a coffee shop or a brewery or something like that. During COVID is kind of illegal. So we're here doing our socially distanced, science cafe. But in the future, we're hoping to have one of these events monthly where we can feature a different faculty member either at the university or who are collaborating with our researchers at Bowling Green State University to study and help make improvements to our Great Lakes and the watersheds that surround them. And the whole idea behind this is that we want it to be a short presentation, so Dr. Ostrowski's presentation will be about 20 minutes, but we really want this to be a dialogue and a conversation. So there will be opportunities to ask questions if you're listening online. So we have about 20 plus people in the room. We have another 30 or so who have signed up to listen online. So thank you all for joining in today. Before we get started, I just wanted to have to go through my thank yous because this was not an easy task to accomplish, especially now. So this Science Cafe really is the result of a partnership between the Center for Public Impact at Bowling Green State University and the Center for Great Lakes and Watershed Studies. So from that, I'd like to thank V. Rosser, who is not able to be here today, Esty Miller, and Laura Mossler from the Center for Public Impact for all the work they did to get the registration website set up and get the materials pulled together and really help us biologists get more organized. So thank you to them. And I'd also just like to thank my colleague in the back, Kevin McClooney. This is something, an idea that he's had since he arrived at BGSU, and we're just thankful that we're able to get this started today, as well as our grad students who are currently manning the door so that no one else comes in, at least the incorrect way. Everyone has to come in through these doors. Sitting at the door are Maisie Davis and Alessia Saul. So thank you to everyone who pitched in to make this possible. Now I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to pause and then introduce the first speaker, Dr. Alexis Ostrowski, who's going to be talking to us today about some of the photochemical science research that she's conducting here at the university to try to alleviate the issue of phosphorus pollution that's coming into our lakes, which is one of the main drivers of these harmful algal blooms that we see in western Lake Erie. So Dr. Ostrowski, she is currently a tenured associate professor in the chemistry department. She her undergraduate degree is from Occidental College in California, and then she obtained her PhD from University of California, Santa Barbara. And she joined BGSU in 2012 and has steadily grown in her research and her lab and the types of research she's conducted. And she's the recipient of a very prestigious NSF Career Award. These are extremely difficult to get, and it really defines you as a up-and-coming researcher in your field. So we're really pleased to have Dr. Ostrowski as part of the Center for Great Lakes and Watershed Studies and as a colleague here at the university. I think you'll find her research that she's going to be speaking to you about today very fascinating. And if you have questions, you can either, we don't have a microphone, we do have a microphone, but no one can use it except for the speaker. So if you have a question, you can either shout it and I will repeat it into the microphone for Dr. Ostrowski to answer at the end of the presentation, or there's a website that you can go to that will flash at the end of Alexis's presentation, and you can input your questions there and I'll read those. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Alexis Ostrowski to give her opening presentation. Thank you.
I think those of you who signed up saw that what I was going to be talking about is, research, actually, how research could be used to solve some societal problems. And I really want to talk about two sort of things, cyanotyping and how that can lead us to cyanobacteria. And the first thing I want to say is I am a professor of chemistry. I'm really a chemist, and so I know probably most of you in the audience are not chemists. And I want to kind of introduce you into thinking about the sorts of things that we think about as chemists when we're doing research, and specifically photochemistry. So as Tim mentioned, I'm not just in part of the Center for Great Lakes and Watershed Studies, but also the Center for Photochemical Sciences here at BGSU, which is really the only center in the world like it where we have a lot of faculty who are studying how light interacts with materials. And so the first thing I want you to think about is actually to think about rust, right? So it seems like something that's really everyday. Hold on. Can I take this out? I like to move around. Yeah. Okay. So it seems pretty everyday if you think about rust. And you look at this, you can see really a lot of different colors in the rust and things like that. And if you're looking at this rust like a chemist, what I want you to think about is that the rust is iron. And the rust isn't just iron. In particular, it's iron 3 compounds. So different types of compounds that have iron in the 3+ state. And when we look at this, we usually write it as Fe3. And Fe is the periodic table symbol for iron. It comes from the word ferric or ferrous. And so that's what I want you to think about is these iron 3 compounds. They're sort of like a form of rust, okay? And, really, these iron 3 compounds have some interesting photochemistry. So they react with light in an interesting way. And this is, in fact, one of the oldest photochemical reactions and the oldest photochemical process known, which is the cyanotype reaction, or also known as blueprint. So the cyano comes from cyan, meaning blue. And what it is it's a reaction of iron 3 compounds. So you can kind of take a piece of paper, or artists sometimes take fabric. They coat it with an orange compound and then a green compound. And these are both iron 3 compounds. And then what you can do is you can place an object, leaf, something like this, and you can actually buy this sort of sensitized paper to do, activities with kids or things like this. You can place a leaf on it, and then you put it out in the sunlight. And what happens is there's a photochemical reaction of this compound, and it generates something new, which is blue. And you get sort of like a negative here, and that's the cyanotyping reaction. And so this is really an interesting reaction that inspired my research when I started out. And that wasn't the only thing that inspired. It's the research by this professor, Carl Carano at San Diego State University. And what he has shown is that you have these sorts of iron 3 compounds similar to the ones in the cyanotype reaction that show up in seaweed, and in particular in this giant sea kelp here, okay? And he had this publication here, and this is what we as scientists do. We share our work through published data and articles that we do in these scientific journals. And so this is the scientific journal Metallomics that looks into about how metals, like iron, are involved in biological systems. And so this was sort of a new finding. And you can see the part I have highlighted. You don't have to maybe know everything, but you see iron 3, Fe3, and then you see would also undergo this photochemistry, right? Maybe. And so he was sort of having a hypothesis in this work, asking, we know now we have these iron 3 compounds in this giant sea kelp. Is there this photochemistry? And so at this conference, I was there in California with the graduate student, Dr. Giuseppe Giamanco, who's since graduated now with his PhD from BGSU. And we're looking on the beach, you see this brown algae everywhere, and we were really inspired and thought, does this photochemistry, like the cyanotype reaction, happen in this seaweed? And really, as chemists, we don't necessarily want to be concerned with all the other stuff that might be in the seaweed. The stuff that makes it brown, all these things. But we want to make a model of this and really look at the photochemistry. And so we wanted to model the seaweed using iron 3 compounds and a polymer, or this long chain molecule that's sort of spaghetti-like, that's called alginate. And so I think if you're not a chemist, you should think about this. I kind of think about it as like a plate of spaghetti and meatballs, right? So you have these long spaghetti-like molecules, that's the polymer or the alginate. And then you have these sort of little meatball clusters, and that's the iron. It's sort of like rust, okay? And so you have these, and when you have these interacting in the right way, they form a material that is called a hydrogel. So this is sort of like Jell-O, basically. So sort of like Jell-O or jam, really kind of has a gel to it, but it has a lot of water in it as well, okay? And so we wanted to use this as a model for this seaweed, right? We have an iron 3 compound, we have this polymer alginate that shows up in the seaweed, and let's look at what happens. And you can see in the middle that little BGSU logo. How did we do that? We shined light on the area where you have the letters, right? And so we can see the color change. And that's sort of like the first indication that something's going on, that there is a photochemical reaction going on. When you see that color change, you know you're turning one thing into something else. So we were really excited about this, that we're doing this photochemical reaction. And one of the advantages of photochemistry you can think about is that you can really control where the light hits the reaction. And so you can really control the color or the properties or what this material is like. And we really wanted to understand a little bit more about what we could do with this material and do some interesting things. And so we did really two things. For those of you in the audience who are students or scientists yourself, you want to look up these papers. I put the direct object indicator, which takes you to the paper if you want to go there. But the first one at the top, we made these gel-looking things. You can see it's holding a weight on the one on the left, and on the one on the right, we shine light on it, and now it gets much softer. And so we can really sort of control the properties because we're controlling the interactions in this material. So you can think about it, if you have your spaghetti and meatballs analogy right, now you're starting to, when you shine light on it, you're adding energy. And now you're starting to do things like cut up the spaghetti. Now you're starting to eat off part of the little meatball, right? And so when you do that, you're changing how those spaghetti and meatballs interact. And a really easy way to think about it is, the spaghetti can get all tangled up with each other, right? And you go to eat it with your fork, and like a big piece of it gets on your fork, right? If you cut up the spaghetti into a bunch of little pieces, now it just kind of can fall through the fork maybe. And so that's how molecularly we think about this change that's going on in the photochemistry, that we start out with something that's this material, you add the light energy and you're chopping it all up and turning it into something that's, really just like a solution. And that's really what you see on the bottom. We could also make these degradable hydrogel beads. So we made these into these little beads, and you shine light on them, and you can see them just start to degrade and turn really into the solution. And in these ones, we had a yellow molecule inside of them, and so then you can see the solution starts to turn a little bit yellow as the molecule starts to get released into the solution surrounding it. And around this time, I started to think as a scientist, right, this is cool, right, but what can we use this for? Is there something that we can really think about the societal benefits of what we can use this material for, right? And around that time, I really became introduced to this problem of the harmful algal blooms that we have in Lake Erie. And in particular, I think probably many of you remember in 2014, there was a drinking water crisis up in Toledo where the harmful algal bloom had produced this toxic microcystis, which would get into the drinking water supply. And so started to think about what are some of the ways we could maybe help solve this problem. And one of the researchers that we work with now is Professor Bob Midden, who's here. And he had been doing research looking into using liquid animal waste or manure, like actually finding ways that they could capture the phosphate from that, and that then it wouldn't be released into the waterways, right? So it's a significant challenge for farmers, and in particular, I have since visited a dairy farmer in the region, and there's a lot of challenges that come with that, right? So the dairy animals, they typically take the animal waste, and this is just basically mixed agricultural waste. They spray down the pens, everything, they vacuum it up, and they put it in a lagoon. And they sort of leave it there to try to have, the bacteria and different things eat away the nutrients. And really they're trying to manage it quite well. But, some of the, broader impacts of climate change and increased rains in this area, in particular increased heavy rains, can lead to overflow of those lagoons, right? And then also, what do you do with all of this water? It's primarily water, it's liquid that has phosphate in it. Typically the farmers will spread it on their field. But that can be expensive to do, and then you spread it on your field, and the next day it rains, and then the phosphate can run into the watershed and then make it into Lake Erie, right? So what do you do? It's really a pretty difficult problem. And one thing I really loved about Dr. Min's research is he's looking at this as not some kind of a waste thing to get rid of, but something that can actually be a really great resource for the farmers, because actually phosphate is mined and it's becoming very limited. So if you really want to have a phosphate fertilizer, you need to find methods to recycle it from the environment. And this is a really great way to do that. So we wanted to look at, can we work with them and use our materials to be able to capture and recycle the phosphate from this animal waste? And so the idea would be, inside our little beads, we have this spaghetti and meatball sort of thing, and that the iron 3 compounds that are those meatball parts could be able to grab a hold of and capture the phosphate. And this had been known in chemistry that the iron might be able to do this, and other things like calcium, et cetera. And so actually it turns out it worked. So it can grab the phosphate, suck it up from waste solutions that have phosphate in them, including the liquid animal waste from the dairy farm that we tested, and it can grab that waste. And so I'm showing you one graph, right? We've seen a lot of graphs these days of coronavirus where, going up maybe is not what you want to see. But in this case, this is what we wanted to see, right? So what we were measuring is looking at the phosphate on the y-axis going up, phosphate. As we shined light on these materials, we did this in the lab with a really intense blue light where we can do this for like 24 hours a day. And then we did some on the roof of our chemistry building here at BGSU in the sunlight, where it got, less hours per day. And then we kept some in the dark. And you can see that as the photochemical reaction starts taking place, it starts releasing the phosphate away from the bead as the bead starts to degrade. And so we have really a way that we can capture the phosphate, and then we can release it with light when we want to, as long as we keep the beads in the dark after we've kept in the phosphate. And so this was really exciting results for us, and really sort of laid out our vision for what we were thinking about, where we could use these materials where you sort of create a recycling method where you take the animal waste from the dairy cows, suck up the phosphate into these hydrogel beads, and then use that as fertilizer for plants in the future. And then those plants could be eaten by the animals or humans, et cetera, and going from there. And so this was the work primarily done by a graduate student who just graduated this spring, Dr. Jayan Karunaratne. This is him in the BGSU greenhouse. It's a great facility that we have here. Looking at using these as fertilizers for tomato plants. And he did a lot of different tests on these, and you can also check out the DOI of this paper. And this paper actually is available for public access, so you don't need any kind of credentials or things like that to have access to it. Anyone in the world can access this paper and look at our data. But what I'll point out to you is you can sort of see the zoomed in picture of the tomato plants. You can see some differences in the green color. You can see some differences in the number of leaves, what those leaves look like. And that sort of tells you that you're getting different nutrients to the plant. And so this was really interesting for us because it showed that something was going on. And so we compared our fertilizer beads to a standard fertilizer solution that you would really go buy at a greenhouse and just mix with water and add to your tomato plants. And here's what we saw. So over the course of really months of this experiment, it was over 3 months, Jayan would collect the tomatoes and count how many tomatoes the plants produce. And you can see that our fertilizer-loaded beads don't quite work as well as the fertilizer solution, right? But we're getting there, and they're definitely better than our control, which had no fertilizer, right? So there's a little bit of stuff in the soil. You still get tomatoes if you plant your tomato plants without fertilizing them. But this was really exciting for me and for him to show that, these hydrogel beads, they're not toxic to the plants. They're really, sucking up this phosphate, and we can really use them, potentially as a really value-added product after the fact to use them as a fertilizer. Maybe they don't have to do as well as a fertilizer solution, but this is from recycled waste, right? And what I really loved and had a great opportunity is that the Toledo Blade picked up on our work and did a profile of us, and that's, you can see in this photo me and Jayan and also Bob, who worked on this project. And so you can read that article as well if you want to find out more about, what our research is as well. And so hopefully I've sort of, convinced you, right, that even if you're a chemist like me, doing really basic research just on iron-3 compounds, the photochemistry, what's going on in those, inspired by some of these natural systems like seaweed, that if you think about your research in a particular way, we can think about it on how to maybe solve some environmental problems, in particular, recycling of the phosphate, actually using this agricultural waste as a resource. And I would really encourage all of you in the audience to get involved. And one of the easiest things that you can do is to become a citizen scientist. So the Rotary Club here, the local District 6600 Rotary Club, has actually for several years done a water quality monitoring project where they're testing for phosphate, nitrate, and ammonia in the local watershed and generating some data that could potentially maybe locate some hot spots to check out. And so I have pictured here Jim Page, who's part of the Waterville Rotary, as well as Deb Cheney, who's the current foundation chair and a prior governor of the District 6600, who've worked on this project. And I would really encourage you to get involved in this sort of citizen science projects as well, thinking about how you could help, with this problem, because it's going to take all of us. Another thing that you can do that's a little bit closer to what I do is you can become a researcher. So for those of you who are undergraduate students in the audience, or maybe you're high school students, you can do paid undergraduate research internships doing research. I have students in my lab, as do many other faculty in the Center for Great Lakes and Watershed Studies, as well as in the Center for Photochemical Sciences. And so this is an opportunity where you can really help out. And I have shown there Zach Hatton and Carrie Bailey, who are both recent BGSU graduates, who are actually authors on those scientific papers because of the work that they did during the summer, as well as some of it for credit through the BGSU independent study research courses. So this is something that's like a really great opportunity to get involved in research and, really do something where, you can Google their names, and find this paper that they're co-authors on, right? And maybe you're already an undergraduate student and you don't know what to do and you're considering graduate school. So one thing I was not aware of prior to going to graduate school is that if you find the right lab in science, you can have a fully funded graduate degree, a master's degree or a PhD, where you can get a teaching assistantship, graduate assistantship, as well as a tuition scholarship, where you are conducting research towards your dissertation or your thesis, and you're getting paid to also be a teaching assistant. And we have those programs with the Department of Biological Sciences and the Center for Photochemical Sciences as well, and so you can get involved, in that way also get involved in the research, not just doing citizen science work as well. So with that, I'll say, I want to keep it a little short. Let's move to questions and comments, anything you have for me or maybe some of the other faculty who are in the Center for Great Lakes and Watershed Studies, Dr. Tim Davis or Dr. Kevin McClooney as well. And thank you.
Thanks so much, Alexis. I guess now we're going to move into that question and, just kind of that conversation time. This doesn't have to be formal. We can even just get some chairs up here because it's Saturday and why stand when you can sit. So if there are any questions, please let us know. Raise your hand and we can repeat the question into the mic so that we can, the folks who are listening on the through the internet can hear as well.
So we have a patent pending. Oh, sorry. Okay, so the question was, how's the commercialization of this going? So we have a patent pending, and that's through BGSU, right? Any of the research done here, is owned by the university. And so there's a patent pending on this work related to that. We are... I shouldn't say we, but the director for innovation here at BGSU, Mark Fox, he is, looking for companies for licensing, et cetera. We've been working with a few here and there, who have expressed some interest, and so that's sort of where it would be. So I would say, if you're someone who's, at a company and interested to talk with Mark Fox, the director of innovation, who, really manages that. But I'm a little bit involved, right? When a company says, how do you do these things? I'm kind of involved with, well, here's what we do. But obviously some non-disclosure agreements and things like that have to be, move forward. Yeah. Other questions? You, sir, in the back. Yeah, okay, so the question was, can I comment not just about my research, but on some of, in particular, the citizen science project that I mentioned at the end that the Rotary Club is doing. And these hotspots, yeah. So all I know, I shouldn't say all I know. I know there's a variety of different organizations, local organizations that do citizen science testing in the local watershed. And they're looking for phosphate, nitrate, and ammonia. And you could think about it, right, is as scientists and many, other scientists in the Center for Great Lakes and Watershed Studies, we'd love to know what are the concentrations of phosphate, ammonia, nitrate, other things like iron, how turbid is the water. I mean, basically at 1 million points along the whole watershed, right? Along the whole, all of Maumee River into Lake Erie. You can imagine, significant expense actually is spent where scientists go out on boats and they, take water and sample water to look for the cyanobacteria, nutrients, et cetera. So the really best thing would be, let's have sensors everywhere, right? But that's such a high cost. And so one thing that many of the scientists do is they have citizen science organizations who go out and test the water. You have many more people, on one day go test the water and generate some data. Now, there's things about that data that, maybe you would think, oh, there's, children's groups who did this. Okay, maybe the children's group got a wrong answer. But what that does is when these people go out in groups and they do this, if they find an area that seems like it has a lot of phosphate in it that no one knew about, that's what I mean by hotspot, right? Scientists can then go, measure it maybe multiple times and see what's going on there, right? And so this is sort of what I mean by the hotspots is, things like that. As you can imagine, this can become a politically contentious issue, right? Where I think really sometimes farmers get vilified, right? You're spreading fertilizer on your fields and it's running into the watershed, right? So maybe farmers are like, don't test on my land. I can understand that. These are done in public waterways or on land of people who want the testing done there. And I think that's really kind of unfortunate because, no farmer wants to just spread fertilizer on the field and let it, run into the lake, right? And so I think that the best groups are those who have, multiple stakeholders involved and, looking at these testing. And I would say looking for hotspots, not in a way to say, oh, we gotcha, you're, doing something wrong, right? But to say, hey, let's check out and see, are there, management practices that we can do to help to not have, the phosphate or the nitrate or ammonia or whatever, into the watershed here. And so I know that with Rotary Club in particular, they have farmers involved in that project as well. And that's what they do is they look for, okay, is there, a way that we can work with you for better practices if we notice some hot spots, in the ditches near your fields. Yeah. And they connect them with, for example, local organizations like the Soil and Water District and things like that on practices that they can do. Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, yeah, that would be maybe better. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So we have a number of questions that have come in through the folks watching online, and one of them, the first one is, what is the effect of the gel beads in the fields?
Okay, so we haven't done this in a field. So we haven't looked at the gel beads in the field. We've done these on greenhouse studies, right, on tomato plants. We've done it on kale plants. That would be wonderful to know. And, as a scientist, one of the things that you need to do the research that probably I should have mentioned I didn't, is you need money to pay for the supplies and things like that, right? And so all of this research currently was funded by the American Chemical Society Herman Frasch Foundation. So this was a grant that I and Dr. Midden submitted, and we got the grant proposal approved, and we had money to do that. Testing all of these on a field would be more money than what we have right now. So we're trying to seek funding through grants to do just that, to look at a field. In terms of, what it does to the soil in the tomato plants, it changes a little bit the iron and calcium uptake by the plants. We can see that by measuring the iron and the calcium inside the leaves and inside the tomato fruits. So we know that they do that. That's not really, surprising given that we're adding a little bit of iron with these hydrogels, right? But it's not a huge significant change and not beyond, enough to cause problems to the tomato plants, right? So the tomato plants didn't show any issues. In fact, the iron and the calcium might have been helpful because in the fertilizer solution one, some of the tomatoes had what's called blossom end rot, which is caused by actually problems in the calcium uptake by the plant, is what I'll say. With Dr. Davis, we did some look into the soil microbe communities and didn't see significant changes in that. So it's not really changing the bacteria in the soil doing things. But really we need to actually test this in a field to see what would happen. And I'd love to do that. Yeah.
Thanks. And if anyone here has questions, just feel free to raise your hand and I will stop talking. But I can keep working through the questions that are coming in online. So there are a few related to, essentially, if I'm not a science major, can I still do research even if it's different than what science majors might do?
Yes. So here at BGSU, and I would say if you're happen to be someone not affiliated with BGSU, or you're a high school student who wants to go to a different college, many universities and colleges have a Center for Undergraduate Research and Scholarship like we have here at BGSU. And so you can spend the summer doing a variety of research, not just in science, but maybe related, other issues related to this in public policy, sociology, or maybe you just happen to be tuning in and you're really interested in economics or something like that. You can do research in that area as well. And so these are fellowships that students can apply. So there's an application process. It's a free application, but you apply for it and you can get paid to do these internships in the summer as well as during the school year. In terms of doing the research for credit, most departments have a course that you can take to do an independent study research project, or if you're in the honors program, you can do that as well. And those sometimes have prerequisites. So I know for chemistry, if you want to do the high-level chemistry research course and get credit for it, you do have to take some general chemistry courses. But I'm sure whatever field students are in, there's some similar things like that to do research that could be related. I know for research in my lab, there's a certain level of experience you need, so you need to have taken general chemistry. But beyond that, the research is new, and I'm interested in students who learn, right, who can learn quickly.
Great. So that brings up, I'm just going to ask this quick question. Are you currently accepting undergrad interns, and do you plan to in the next year?
Yes, actually, I have been really trying to get one, possibly two students to work on this project. So I have a master's student who's working on this project right now, but I'm really interested in having two undergraduate students work on this project. So please contact me. You can contact me on my email, or I have a lab group Twitter account, so you could use that. I don't know what would be possible, but do that. And if there's other faculty who you're interested in, I would also just suggest to email them about what, are you accepting students, and yeah.
Great. So these, the beads that you're talking about, and the cost, right? The feasibility from a cost perspective. How much are the raw materials, right? And what options are out there for these raw materials? And are we, if we're, going to try this extensively in the western basin of Lake Erie, the Maumee River watershed, how feasible would it be to actually have enough of the raw material to
right.
conduct this type of?
So that's a really great question. Right now, our estimates are that if we use this alginate, as I talked about, and you use the iron compounds that I talked about, pure things that we can, buy from companies and then use to make, the cost of the material to treat the agricultural waste right now would be about 30 cents a gallon. That's too much, right? We need something about at least 10 times less, more like 3 cents a gallon. And so we're really trying to look at alternatives to the alginate and, things that we can maybe use, and that's an active area of research on what can we do to lower the cost. However, in certain, situations, maybe 30 cents per gallon treatment is worth it. It's really about a balance of how much it costs versus what the benefit outcome is. And if there's, a really big desire to, I should say a huge pressing need to lower phosphate, maybe it would be economically feasible. But that's really the question right now is, what would be, what we could do to lower the cost is something we're just now starting to look into.
Thanks. I can keep going with online questions. All right. So you have farmers that, they, whether it's CAFOs, these, concentrating animal feeding operations, or others that have to deal with this manure. Well, why don't they just drive it to another state?
The transportation costs are huge, right? So that's kind of one of the biggest problems. When I first started this project and they talk about like manure, it's not really that. It's like liquid animal waste. Lots of, it's really more like water that's kind of gross looking, right? And so it's costs a lot of money to transport it. And then what do you do with it? What do you do with it? It has so much phosphate in it, right? I think, and then the next question I sort of touched on is that, we need phosphate? We need, fertilizers for these plants in order to keep agricultural production what it is, to feed people. Like, so we're literally talking about, how do we do this? And the phosphate that comes right now for these standard fertilizer solutions, if you want to have your garden or you want your lawn, that's mined phosphate from, limestone or other rocks. That's like dwindling, right? It's sort of like the idea that we won't be able to mine phosphate forever. Like, so some scientists say, in 50 years, there won't be any phosphate left anymore to mine. And so we have to figure out a way to recycle the phosphate and do something with it, right? Even if you transport it out of state or you transport it somewhere else, you're basically transporting, dirty water that has a high value phosphate in it, right? So it's about cost and I think also some of the environmental concerns as well of like what do you do with it?
Thanks so much.
We've got one question.
Go ahead.
Here. Okay. Okay, so the question was when the farmers have the phosphate solution or animal waste, they apply to the field and then it rains and then that washes into the watershed. How do we know the beads won't do the same? So really the idea is that these are like a gel solid. Certainly if there's like massive rains, that's gonna, those could potentially wash into the waterway as well. But it's different when you have the phosphate inside this solid gel that's more highly concentrated, right? You can think about it that the phosphate in there, it's sort of like concentrated as opposed to just really like not concentrated water that you're spraying on the field. And where I think maybe the bigger thing is not just that, but you can take water in this giant lagoon lake, treat it with this solid stuff that sucks up all the phosphate, net it out, and now you can just use the water, however you want, water the plants, whatever. It's not now, doesn't now have all this phosphate, and so you can reuse the water as well. And so that could potentially still, wash in, but definitely it's going to be less because it's more of this, soil sort of thing. So, yeah, that's kind of the idea.
Right, so just a couple more questions online. So these are really large scale, right? So what we're talking about here is, applying these beads and trying to deal with, kind of the kind of industrial agriculture in the Maumee River watershed. That's really kind of driving many of these problems at current. But for those in the room, what can we do at a local or at a household level to help, kind of reduce the amount of, nutrient runoff that is,
Yeah, so one thing I learned through this project and talking with farmers and talking with actually, like, for example, the BGSU grounds crew and, people like that is, if you think of the traditional crops, soybean, in this area, soybeans and corn, farmers don't really need to fertilize those. They can actually do appropriate, crop rotation practices and things like this. So it's not like those need a ton of fertilizer. And for places like BGSU here with the lawns and stuff, these lawns are not really fertilized that often outside of the athletic fields, so which are fertilized a lot actually, because really you're cutting the grass really a lot. There's people playing sports on the grass, tearing it up, and so the grass is under stress and needs a little bit extra fertilizer. But I did learn from talking with them that a typical homeowner way over fertilizes their lawn. So there's that. And, since beginning this project also, like, I no longer fertilize my lawn. I think that, anytime you fertilize your lawn, you're having the same problem. You fertilize your lawn, it rains, it goes into the, gutters in the street. And so, in my opinion, one of the easiest things for homeowners to do is stop fertilizing your lawn. Another thing that shows up with a lot of these phosphate things, and I know from some of the homeowners along Lake Erie, they pay attention to, is some of these outdoor cleaning products or really just cleaning products you use at home can contain a lot of phosphate. So you're scrubbing your deck with this cleaning product and stuff like that. It has a lot of phosphate in it, and you're washing it down. For the homeowners I talked to who are right on the shores of Lake Erie, then they're washing it into Lake Erie. And they talked with me about how they don't do that anymore. They buy these cleaners and things like that that don't contain phosphate. So that's something else that you can do as well. And really, I would say get involved with some citizen science work as well, as I mentioned. And I learned a lot getting involved in that project with the Rotary Club. There's some really wonderful people involved with that.
Thanks. Okay, 2 more questions, Alexis, and then we'll kind of close it out for today. But thanks so much for taking these. So how open are the farmers that you've been speaking to trying something like this on their field?
I think in my experience, farmers are incredibly open to trying things that would help them save money. And when you talk about farmers, what I'm really talking about, the average farmer doesn't have a lot of, animal waste to get rid of. These are, dairy farmers. These are, farmers who own significant livestock, right? They're, and the one we worked with, incredibly willing to try new things. The question is just, does it work within their system they have right now, and is it cost effective, right? So, the profit margins on, milk is not really that high, right? And it's, incredibly important that you get the milk fresh, things like this. And so it has to have something that works within them, but they're incredibly willing to try new things, very aware of the problems. Many of these things I learned from these farmers about, I would say the dairy farmers in the area I talked to, their number one concern was, they can appropriately manage the phosphate from the animal waste in the lagoon as long as there's not heavy rains. And because then, no amount of doing anything can help you. If there's like massive 7 inches of rain, where even here in BG, like we had a storm the other day, there's huge amounts of rain in a shorter period of time and the streets are flooded. You can imagine it's almost impossible to keep those lagoons from overflowing and, you know, running things away. So my experience with the farmers is they're incredibly willing to try new things. It's just a matter of you know, does it work with what they're doing, right? Farmers cannot afford to spend massive amounts of money on things that are, you know, not really going to work. And yeah.
Thanks, Alexis. Yeah, it's generally farmers are land rich and cash poor.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a big issue. All right. So last two questions, just to end on kind of just a, I guess, more personal note. What made you get into science, and what are the most exciting parts of your job?
I've been interested in science a lot since I was a kid, and I know people probably say this all the time, but I really have always enjoyed being outside, taking nature walks, things like this, and you know, really actually started being interested in more, and I would call it ecology, right? I was really interested in, you know, what leaf is this from what plant, you know, things like this. And so always really interested in science, but where I got specifically interested in chemistry was in college. So at the time, I was not a chemistry major. In fact, I hated chemistry in high school, hated it. Thought, oh, who cares about this periodic table, whatever. But I had to take chemistry in college because it was like a you know, basic science course requirement. So I was like, okay, I'll take it. And you know, I just really loved it. And I really fell in love with the idea, kind of like what I talked about, you know, thinking about compounds on a molecular level, like the spaghetti and meatballs sort of thing, and thinking about what happens to things, when, like, for example, when light shines on it, when, you know, other stuff happens. And so I was really interested in this idea of how you could manipulate things and control things at a molecular level, you know, imagining what could take place. And so I really fell in love with chemistry in college. I did undergraduate research and got paid to do it as an internship in the summer. And that's really when I fell in love with it. Like just working in a lab with other scientists, you know, it's not like you alone working on this project. You have friends, you're working on it, you're, you know, thinking about ideas, you're doing experiments, most of them fail, and then you're like, well, I'm gonna try this new thing this other way and maybe it'll work. And that's when I really fell in love with chemistry. And what was the last part of the question? Best part of my job?
Yeah.
So I really enjoy, the best part of my job, I think, really is mentoring students in research. I extremely love this part of my job. Graduate students, undergraduates, I am so incredibly proud of, you know, these students and what they've accomplished. You know, I feel like I get to list my name as author on the paper, but really, you know, I'm just sort of providing advice here and there, and I feel like the students, you know, do all the work. And I just really enjoy helping them, you know, figure out how to do research, new ideas, how to write scientific papers, get those published, and, you know, ultimately, hopefully, you know, find a job that they really enjoy. So that's really the most enjoyable part of my job.
Great. Well, thanks, Alexis. And let's just give Alexis a round of applause, and we'll close out. But unless there are other questions? No other questions? Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much, Alexis. We really appreciate your talk and your time.
Thanks.
And thank you all for coming. This is again, the format of these events is supposed to be a little bit more intimate, but you know, obviously, right now we're making do with what we can. We plan, again, just as a reminder, we plan on holding one of these about once a month. The next one will be all virtual. This was just kind of in person to try to start this off, and sorry that we couldn't hold it outdoors. Obviously, the 4.5 inches of rain we got over the last week kind of prevented big equipment from being set up outside. So thank you so much for coming. You know, these science cafes are really, we want to kind of speak to you more personally about, you know, the challenges in the Great Lakes region and how BGSU is working, you know, within the centers that we have on campus and with our partners both in industry and in academia and in government to try to solve them. So hopefully you'll tune in again next month. We'll have the information for the next Science Cafe up shortly. And if we just really appreciate your time this afternoon. Hopefully you learned something, and we'll tune back in next month. Thanks so much.